Years ago, I met a very, very successful man. He taught me something I never forgot for the rest of my life. He said, Tony, whatever you do in your life, whenever you find you're going to go someplace where there's some great ideas and great resources, he said, always make sure you take a pen and paper. He said, because what you want to do is you want to be able to capture those ideas and cement them to paper so you can review them in the future. In fact, what he got me to do was to keep a journal, and I would highly encourage you, by the time you come to the next management session, or maybe even during a break today if you wanted to get yourself a hardbound journal. Hardbound journal meaning not a loose leaf. And you can get those in all kinds of stationery stores, some religious bookstores. And the bottom line is, if you keep a journal, you don't even write it every day, but when you get thoughts or ideas, you capture it there, you can't believe what'll happen. You'll start to accumulate a wealth of knowledge and ability and skills and resources that not only will help you, but you can help other people as well. I've been keeping journals myself now for about a dozen years. And I go back and review my life, and it has two real values, I think. One is, it gives you a chance to really see how much you've grown. Because how many of you have kids? I'm curious. How many of you have somebody come up and say, boy, your kid's really growing? You go, really? Because you're so close to them, you don't notice it as much. How many found that to be true? Guess what? It's even worse with yourself. Sometimes we don't give ourselves credit for the amount that we're growing, but I'll tell you one thing, if you keep a journal, it won't be hard to see how much you're growing. Because you'll see the kind of goals you had back then, the kind of things you thought back in those days, and you'll begin to see the evolution of your growth. Also, I personally believe that if life's worth living, it's worth recording. And it's an incredible gift to give to your children, because someday they get to know exactly how you were at different times in your life, and they get to learn your lessons without having to go through it. How many of you, be honest, have felt feelings at times and you were upset, but you didn't share it because you didn't know how, or you didn't share it because, well, you thought, well, maybe it's really about me, or you didn't share it because you didn't want to offend somebody even though you were mad or upset? How many have had that experience in the past? And when you don't share something, what happens when you just keep it inside and build it up? Yeah, it festers. Does it get better or worse? It gets a lot worse, and eventually what happens, then you blow up about something that could have been handled so much easier along the way. But then there's the other approach, which is you're looking for things on a regular basis to be able to give people feedback about. And some people develop that habit, or you communicate in a way where basically you're communicating your feelings, like you're upset, but do you always have all the information? No. And so you're making a decision about how to feel based on false information. How many of you have ever gotten upset and later on felt a little dumb because you found out you were upset about something really shouldn't have been upset about? So one philosophy says, keep it inside. The other philosophy says, well, get it out. Well, what if you get it out and then you find out that you were wrong? By the way, do we like being wrong? No. So then what would we probably do? Justify, defend? Well, well, yeah, I didn't know that, but if you've done that before. Right? And that does not make a relationship work. Plus, that person gets upset. It's kind of like, anybody ever come up to you and say, why are you upset? And you go, I'm not upset. You go, no, yeah, you are. You go, no, I'm not. Yes, you are. Well, I'm getting upset. Okay, that also happens unless we're really clear. So what we're really going to do is we're going to start our whole basis of studying of communication to remember one thing, and write this in your notes if you would, and that is the quality of your life is directly related to the quality of your communication, period. Now, pretty basic idea, nothing earth-shattering, but I'm here to tell you that's your entire life comes down to this. The quality of your entire life comes down to the quality of how you communicate. With whom? The quality of your life starts with the quality of how you communicate to yourself. That's where it all starts. How you feel is not based on the environment. Is it based, like how you feel, is that determined based on like whether or not you have lots of money? Yes or no? All of our suffering as human beings, I deal with people all the time. I mentioned you off camera, two people I coached yesterday. One's presidential candidate, and the other one is a rap superstar, right? Both in the same day. And without naming any names, people that have everything by your point of view, most people's point of view, they have the fame and they have the love and millions of people love them and they have great economics, financial freedom, and they have homes and they have the fashion, they have everything. They're the I can't tell you how many of them are miserable. Right. The majority are miserable. I'm not bullshitting. I'm the one who gets the phone call from the vast majority. When I say miserable, they're so used to it, some of them don't even realize they're miserable, right. But most do. They get in a place where it's like, how do I keep this up? How do I keep outdoing myself? How do I built these 32 companies, how to keep all 32 going and make them all grow every single year. And that's not how life is, right? Right. And then they worry about what will people think, what will they do? So the decision to say, I am not going to suffer, that if suffering arises, pain's one thing, suffering's another. Suffering is when you're like, I'll give you an example. A friend of mine is
a very famous Indian industrialist and billionaire guy. And he just recently took a sport in India that's been around 2,000 years that almost every village child plays, and he turned it into a professional sport. No one had ever made a professional sport 2 years ago. He invested, I don't know, I'm making the number up, $20 million in it. In 2 years, the sport is so successful in India that 500 million people watched the finals.
That's amazing.
2 months ago. 500 million people, right? So 500 million, that's how it is in India. And people are saying this is gonna be as big as, for them cricket is the ultimate thing, right? The biggest cricket. So his team valuation, I'm making the number up, I think it's gone to like $500 million in 2 years from, $25 million. And his team is number 2 in the whole world, right? Wow. He's got these great players. So I'm with him, and he gets a phone call. And he's just got done telling me about this great success and where it is and how proud he is and how everyone goes to games and people are so thrilled and it's just become this movement in India and he created, he's so proud of it. And he gets this phone call, and the phone call is from his management team telling him that one of his competitors has just offered 4 times as much money as he was offering to his top 3 athletes who are the core of his whole team. And of course they all took them, right? And he was so angry. He was like, I can't even believe this. These guys were working in shops and I brought them here and I made them a star on national television and they have no loyalty to me. And he's suffering. And the way you suffer is you focus on yourself. Suffering comes when we obsess about ourselves, what we're getting or not getting, what we should have done, what others should have done for us. It's the me, 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 me game. You, my dear friend, and I say this with no blowing smoke, your primary core is a giver, which is why you're prospering. You're not the me, me, me. You're like, how do I give more, do more, share more, create more? How do we do a better job for our clients? How do we do a better job for our internal customers who work with us, our partners? Your entire life is that. That's why you're prospering. And you're not feeling suffering. But when you do suffer, and I promise you do, you correct me if I'm wrong, it'll because you're worrying about something in the future. How's this gonna happen? Will this come together? Suffering can be worry, it can be anger, it can be frustration. It's anything that takes you out of a beautiful state. And here's what people don't get. You can end suffering by stop focusing on yourself and focus on something you wanna serve greater than yourself. Your children, your wife, your mission, your life. You can get out of it in an instant because the nature of the human mind is to constantly compare things. Your mind, your brain is a 2 million year old device, and it is not designed to make you happy. It's designed to make you survive.
Ordinary just simply isn't enough. Ordinary is when you want to become average and to fit in. But to get to extraordinary, what you do is you have to consult the invisible place within yourself. And this is called your soul. And your soul, well, I jotted down a few words about the soul based on a lecture I heard from a great teacher of mine who lived in Bulgaria. He was an initiatic science teacher. And his lecture was very profound. And I wrote these words after listening to one of his recorded lectures. He said, the ideal of the soul, the thing it asks for is neither knowledge, nor light, nor happiness. The ideal of the soul is space, immensity. The one thing your soul needs is to be free. Free to expand and reach out and to embrace the infinite. Yes, the ideal of the soul is infinity. It is miserable when it is circumscribed and restricted. It is a fragment of the universal soul, which is infinite. That's what I speak about here in this program. The need to move beyond just fitting in. The need to move past being circumscribed. The soul does not like when you get fenced in, when it is told what to do, when it's told it has limitations, when it's told it can't become that. And so many of us go through our life with these enormous limitations that we've placed upon ourselves that have been handed to us from the time that we were little boys and little girls. If you would like to accomplish something, you must first expect it of yourself. And my question to you is, what do you expect of yourself? Do you expect to be able to perform miracles, to attract into your life the kind of prosperity that you are entitled to? Do you expect that you can manifest the kind of relationships that you would like? In order to be able to have these kinds of expectations for yourself, you have to make a dramatic change, a dramatic shift. You must change what's possible for you and what you believe is possible for you. But the question becomes, who am I? I've been teaching philosophy for 40 years now, either at the high school level or junior high school level or university level, graduate school, and now in stages all over the world and in front of audiences such as this, watching at home and here this evening. Who are you? And what is real? My teacher in India, his name was Nisargadatta Maharaj. He was asked the question, Swami, what is real? Master, what is real? And his response was, that is real, which never changes. So what part of you is real by that definition? Who are you that never changes?
So-called unhappiness is also a childish way of trying to change things by being as unhappy as you can about them. And the underlying unconscious or semi-conscious assumption is, if I'm really unhappy, somebody, perhaps God, is going to do something about it, or I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm going to show him how dreadful it is, and then finally, this is an unconscious assumption behind the unhappiness, because you believe, if you're habitually and frequently unhappy, you believe that it has a purpose. It's an underlying assumption. Perhaps you wouldn't verbalize it in that way, but you believe that it works for you. Of course it doesn't, but things are going to change, but just need to be really unhappy, so that God finally, even if you don't believe in God, this can still be the mechanism, the underlying unconscious assumption behind it. It's something is going to happen. And of course the opposite is true, because the more unhappy you are with something, the more you are stuck in the situation.
I think it really starts with realizing that you don't love yourself, that most people don't. Most people feel they're not good enough, that they haven't done it right, they won't do it right, they'll never be enough, and they're definitely not lovable. And when we come from that space, it's very hard to create things for ourselves that are really good. So in the early days when I worked with people, I used to fix this problem and fix that problem, and you'd have this, a health thing, and we'd work on that and we'd work on this. And one day I discovered, much to my amazement, that if I would help people learn to love themselves, to really accept themselves as they are, we didn't have to work around problems, because it was almost like a miracle. Everything seemed to fall away. It's a hard one for people, because we grow up believing that we're not good enough and nothing is right. I remember lots of times I would ask people, well, what is really wrong with you? What have you done that is so terrible that you're not acceptable to yourself? And I never, ever got an answer that made any sense. You know, they might say something like, well, I'm too fat. Well, so, you know, but when you talk about loving yourself, a lot of people think that that's vanity, but it isn't really. It has nothing to do with that. That is narcissistic. But to really care for you and to acknowledge that you are an important being. It's almost like in the Bible they would say, you recognize that you are a child of God, that therefore you are perfect. But even if you're not a biblical person, if you can recognize that you are a being that has self-worth, if you can really recognize your own worth, then you start to treat yourself differently. And I think that's what's so very important about loving yourself, is you stop beating yourself up, you stop making yourself wrong, you stop talking about how awful you are, and you stop saying things like, I'm really stupid and stuff, and you start to treat yourself with a certain amount of respect. And this makes an enormous difference, because what you give out in life is what comes back to you. So if you're giving out a feeling of, I'm okay, I'm good enough as I am, and I am acceptable, and I love life, and I love me, and you start having gratitude for yourself and for life, then life treats you differently, because you are having a different vibration that you're giving out and getting back. And that's when things really start to flow. Now, a lot of people don't realize it, but you have to practice. You just have to start it. And that's why I try to get people to do a lot of mirror work. If you look in the mirror, just simple things like looking in the mirror in your own eyes and say, I love you. I really, really love you. And it helps if you use your name, Louise, I love you. I really love you. It gets to that little child inside that has been rejected for so long, and it breaks open sort of a dam or a door or whatever you want to call it, and it's like little miracles start to happen. Lots of little good things happen, and the universe loves grateful people. The more grateful you are, the more you get to be grateful about.
If we do not do what we cannot do, there's no issue. If we do not do what we can do, we are a disaster. So, I'm saying, at least are you as joyful as you were when you were 5 years of age? At 35, 40, if you are not as joyful and as exuberant as a 5-year-old boy or girl that you were, obviously you're a disaster, because you're not even square one. That was square one of your life when nothing was in your control, all right? You're not even in square one, you sunk deeper. That's a disastrous life.
We all get to decide what our values are, what our belief system is, what our rules in life are, the code of ethics that we live by. Those are all decisions that people mistake for empirical truth. But if you want to know how just unempirically true it is, look across all societies, they don't share it.
Because each of these places carries with it a value system, a belief system, things that are unique to that group that you grow up in, what your parents tell you about your family, about you, what it means to be you, what you learn in schools, what you see in the media, all of that stuff is shaping how you view yourself and how you view the world. But it's happening insidiously because it is so invisible. People don't realize that they are choices. Now, once you reframe all of this as these are things that I'm choosing to believe, and once you realize that you can choose to believe something new and thusly get a different result, everything changes.
Question of what do you stand for? And I will say this, you're nothing if you're not the truth. Substance through your service, your offering of your whole self.
You're always reaching out, so to speak, internally to the next. You're never quite here, always looking for some fulfillment there, so you can never embrace the fullness of now.
If you don't fix yourself with limited identities, if you do not compare yourself with anything, if you explore, see, if you want this tree to grow to its fullest thing, that's why I said not the fruit, root. If you count the fruits, maybe that tree is bearing more fruit than this one. That's not the point. You nurture the root. The fullest possible nurture if you give to the root, what it has to become, it will become. A blade of grass cannot become a tree. But is it not wonderful?
But to accept your pathway without resistance is where you're going to find freedom. That what happened is one of my quotes that say, what happened, happened, and couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't. And if you really get that, there's a lot of freedom to be found, because oftentimes we're judging our history as though that shouldn't have happened, they shouldn't have done that. Well, now you're stuck. What happened, happened, couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't.
When you hit pay dirt like that, when you connect to the field, when you connect to the divine, whatever you want to call it, when your consciousness merges with a greater consciousness, and that arousal creates ecstasy, bliss, oneness, whatever you want to call that, you realize that it never came from anything out there.
Atheists, in seeking to understand why mankind seems to be incurably religious, that they came up with multiple theories that would say that religion is a result of the inventive, creative imagination of human beings who simply don't have the moral courage to face the cold, stark reality of the ultimate meaninglessness of human life, so that there is a psychological impulse, a psychological need out of which, in order to escape grim reality, people formulate for themselves in their own comfort the idea of a God who hopefully will rescue them from meaninglessness. Now, when I mentioned at the beginning of this course how I used to teach a course in atheism where I required my students in the graduate school to read the primary sources of the atheists, and that as we analyzed them, I looked at the epistemological patterns that we've explored, questions of causality and rationality and so on. But also, if you recall those earlier lectures, I mentioned that almost to a man, the critics of theism came back to this principle that the real impetus for theism is grounded in human psychology. And because of that, several years ago, I undertook to write a book for lay people to give them a brief introduction to some of these skeptical philosophers and to show how the New Testament responds to it. And the original title of this book, which is now in paperback, was called The Psychology of Atheism. The title now is If There's a God, Why Are There Atheists? In other words, I'm playing on the principle we talked about the last time, where the 19th century skeptics were saying, if there is no God, why are there theists? And their answer was psychological need. And so I'm asking in this book, if there is a God, why are there people who deny his existence, and so on. And early in the book, I have a discussion of why it is that great thinkers disagree. We've mentioned that in the past, that some of the most brilliant thinkers in all of history have come to both ends of the pole. Though I radically disagree with Jean-Paul Sartre in his understanding of reality, I certainly don't think that he's a dummy. Jean-Paul Sartre was one of the most insightful, engaging, acute thinkers of the modern era. And certainly John Stuart Mill was also a giant in terms of his intellectual power. He was prodigious, obviously, as was Kant and Hume and Feuerbach and the others, Nietzsche. And yet on the other side of the coin, you have people like Aquinas and Augustine and Anselm and the Titans historically who have defended the theistic arguments. And so it's not just a question of superior intellect, that the difference among people may be because the evidence was incomplete for one group or the other. Somebody made logical errors, and we know that brilliant people can disagree because of epistemological errors of one sort or another. But I said one of the factors that has to be included in this whole debate is the psychological factor. Let's agree right up front that the question of the existence of God is indeed loaded with psychological baggage. I was at a soccer game last night, and I was sitting next to a man who was getting more and more exercised by the referee's calls because he felt that the referee was favoring the opposing team. And he asked me about it after the game, and I said, you know, I used to be a basketball referee when I was in seminary, and I can tell you this, that when I was refereeing basketball games with another guy, and if the place was filled to capacity, I knew that there were only two people in the whole room who didn't care who won the game. And it was me and the other ref. I said, because we didn't have a bias, we really didn't. But everybody else in that room had a bias. And they see plays through that. They anticipate, they think somebody's going to foul the person, and even if they don't touch them, in their eye, they see the foul and want to know why I didn't blow the whistle, or so on. And so we know that, and we all have experienced that as we root for our favorite teams in sports and the like. That we as people are capable of looking at the evidence through a lens that favors our own bias. And I have to say, before the whole world, that every bone in my body wants there to be a God. I can't stand the thought that my life is a useless passion. And so I have to admit that it, not only that I have that desire, but I also agree with the skeptics that it is possible for people to construct philosophical systems on the basis of their own desires, on the basis of their own prejudices and biases, and have that cloud their thinking. And I also want to say, in the final analysis, the reality of the existence of God cannot be determined on the basis of what I want to be true. And I agree with the critics of Kant that just because life would be meaningless without God, that's not sufficient grounds to argue for the existence of God. All that really describes is the state of our subjectivity and of our desires. It doesn't prove God one way or the other. But one of the things that I think we have to understand is that everybody who gets involved in the discussion of the existence of God is dealing with the same psychological baggage. Because for those who deny the existence of God, there is an enormous vested interest on their part for the denial of the existence of God. Because God stands as the greatest obstacle in the universe to my own autonomy. If I really want to do my own thing with impunity, then I know that the highest obstacle to that would be a self-existent eternal God who is righteous and who is just. And that if I have ever sinned and have not repented of my sin, I know the worst thing that could befall me would be to fall into the hands of the living God. And so denial is not just a river in Egypt. I will do anything in my power to deny my guilt and to deny my culpability, even to the point of denying that I am accountable ultimately.